Academy of Sciences of Czech Republic, Institute of Philosophy, very interesting place in Prague, which I recommend to everybody. And the first of our guests will be an acquaintance for a long time, many years, which is Vladimir Svoboda. We're talking about Deontic logic and language games. Many things about it.
Thanks. First of all, I'd like to thank Joe for the invitation because we've had a wonderful stay here in Natal. It was a great experience for us, so thank you. My talk will be kind of programmatic. It will be about Deontic logic, but I think that it should be accessible both for those who don't have much experience with Deontic logic, and I hope it could be interesting also for those who are oriented in Deontic logic, because I am going to propose some kind of reform of Deontic logic, or at least a new angle to look at the problems of Deontic logic. The paper won't be technical at all, and just if you have any questions, if there are some problems, please feel free to stop me and ask a question. So the first question is, what is Deontic logic? I think everybody who is at least a bit oriented in logics has some idea what is Deontic logic, but in fact, in my view, the answer is far from easy. Different people mean different things by Deontic logic, and that this field is kind of messy can be illustrated with the help of this example. This is a list of logical disciplines presented under these different names during the 20th century that kind of belong into the area of Deontic logic. Some people would say that some of them do not fall into the area, and some people like me would say that in fact it makes sense to count all the disciplines as sub-disciplines of Deontic logic. So we come across names of like the logic of will, which was introduced by Ernst Mally, a guy who was the first one to try to create some axiomatic system of Deontic logic. The logic of ought, which was also used by Mally. The logic of imperatives, term was coined in the end of the 30s by Hofstadter and McKinsey. Deontic logic, this is the term used by the founding father of modern Deontic logic, Georg Henrik von Wright, in the beginning of 1950s. Then he used also the term the logic of norms. Stenius and many other people use the term the logic of normative systems. Some people, not only Alperon, use the term the logic of normative propositions. Then Nicholas Escher wrote a very interesting book about the logic of commands in the 60s. Segeberg speaks at some point about the logic of commitment and obligation, and Pastok, not a long time ago, presented theory under the title The Logic of Prescriptions. And this list is not complete by far. Sometimes you come across the terms like the logic of ethics or the logic of law, but I suggest that these shouldn't be regarded as kind of sub-disciplines of Deontic logic, but rather like areas of application of Deontic logic, as well as of application of other logical theories. So, as I said, the situation is quite messy, and I suggest a kind of broad conception of Deontic logic, according to which basically all these theories should be included or could be included under the widely understood Deontic logic. This is the starting point of my presentation. Now I want to point out to a problem that has troubled Deontic logic basically since its beginning, and I'm going to use this quote from von Wright, from the 60s, where he wrote in his famous book Norm and Action, Deontic sentences, for example, you ought to pay your debts or you may park in front of the house, admit two interpretations. There's a prescriptive model and a descriptive factual one. Prescriptively interpreted, they express norms. Descriptively interpreted, they express true or false propositions to the effect that certain norms exist. And you can see that by mentioning this true or false here, suggests implicitly that the norms are not neither true nor false, that they don't have truth value, so they are somewhat different. So what he says quite explicitly is that formulas like OP, PP, FP, and Q, and so on, can be interpreted either descriptively, like norm propositions, or prescriptively, like expressing norms, expressing something, some kind of regulation. The very same idea, namely that we have these two interpretations, and I forgot to say that in his norm and action, von Lipp suggests that we can actually study the logic of norms via the logic of norm propositions. That we can do one logic and cover both areas. And this is the same idea was kind of openly expressed by von Lipp's compatriot Erik Stenius. Actually, they were both members of the Swedish minority in Finland, who formulated this principle 3, which says the logical relations between normative sentences in their model sense, the prescriptive one, are the same as the logical relations between the same sentences in their factual sense, the descriptive one. And I think that this is the source of many troubles of Deontic logic, and so I suggest to call this idea Stenius fallacy, because it leads to a kind of schizophrenia that is surprisingly common among Deontic logicians. You see, the idea is that these sentences can have both the modal interpretation and the factual one. But it's unproblematic as concerns the first four formulas, but if you look at the fourth formula, so you wonder if these expressions are interpreted prescriptively, so that they don't have truth values, what sense you could make of the formula connected with the classical propositional connective, which is defined on entities that have truth values. And you would quite commonly find papers by some Deontic logicians saying, oh, okay, these norms do not have truth values, and then we are going to study their logic, and we will use formulas, including formulas like this. So this is the kind of schizophrenic position. To exactly this problem pointed David Mackinson in a paper on a fundamental problem of Deontic logic in 1999. And you should remember that Deontic logic originated in the 20s of the 20th century, and since the 50s it was established as kind of respectable theory. And in 1999, Mackinson writes, in axiomatic presentations of systems of Deontic propositional logic, the truth functional connectives and most spectacularly not are routinely applied to items construed as norms, forming compound norms out of elementary ones. But as Dubeslav and Jergensen already observed, if norms lack truth values, then it is not clear what could be meant by such compounding. So I think that this is pointing out to what I call Stenius fallacy or Deontic schizophrenia. We could, of course, make an attempt of distinguishing the languages because it makes sense to formulate some sentences interpreted prescriptively and connect them with some connectives, like you ought to close the door and switch off the light, or close the door and switch off the light. We could want to formulate it by some formula like this. So we will try to distinguish the classical connectives, standard ones, and some non-standard connectives which would be suited to connect these norms which do not have any truth values. They would be defined on these norms bearing perhaps some other semantic values. So let's try what we would get if we distinguish these two sets of connectives. On the one hand, we would get expressions of the language of Deontic descriptions, of the Deontic propositions. And here we have examples of 8 formulas of this language, which is kind of the most standard language used in Deontic logic. And we can see that there is just no problem. We use only the connectives from the first set, and there is no problem because everything that is in play are propositions, either kind of some classical propositions or this specific Deontic propositions. And so this is, there is no problem with language of this kind, but if we try to make use of the connectives from the other set, there appear quite clear problems. For example, if we want to try to find counterparts of the formulas 8 and 9 in the second set, it's quite unclear what kind of connectives should be here, because it seems like we would need another connective or another kind of connective that would be capable of connecting something that doesn't have truth value and something that has truth value. And few people made attempts to kind of define connectives of this kind. So this is one problem. Another problem is the one mentioned by Mackinson. It's quite unclear if this is some kind of negation, what an expression of this kind should say, or how should it be interpreted. In natural language, you probably won't find any natural reading for prescriptive sentence with the negation in the beginning. This is problematic. You ought to do P. It is not the case that you ought to do P. But this is something like do P and then not do P. It's much more natural to kind of formalize the sentence don't do P by do not P. Yeah? So this is very problematic, and then it is also unclear what formulas like this would be. Do P or do Q. Is it a prescription? It doesn't sound like a reasonable prescription because it sounds like the person who is issuing the command kind of hasn't made up his mind and doesn't know what, doesn't decide what she or he wants to prescribe. So I think that the fact that if we are even a bit consequential, the two languages appear so kind of different and shows that the status principle is then to fail. Now, I think that if we want to avoid problems of this kind, which are of course not necessary, then it's very useful to make use of prescriptive language games introduced by David Lewis in the end of the 90s. Some of you, perhaps all of you, perhaps know the articles scorekeeping in language games or the problem about permission. And in this article, he introduces the game with 3 players: the master, the slave, and the kibitzer. The master's moves consist in issuing commands and permissions to the slave, as the master is the one who is in command. The slave's moves consist in doing what the master requires. The slave is supposed to be basically silent, and kibitzer's moves are descriptions of the normative situation. So the kibitzer is supposed to correctly describe the normative situation that arises because of the master's commands and permissions. So the kibitzer is kind of referee of the language game. He is the one that keeps the score of the game. We can distinguish fallible kibitzers that can make mistakes concerning the scorekeeping, or ideal kibitzers that are infallible, that if they say something, it's always right. And Lewis says that those situations also uses his possible words that conform to the master's commands and permissions together create the sphere of permissibility. In the beginning of the game, we have the total space of possible worlds, and then all the words are within the sphere of permissibility, and then the sphere kind of adjusts itself according to this prescription. And so my kind of suggestion is to say that Deontic logic is the logic of the reasoning that helps the master, the slave, and the kibitzer to play the language game successfully. And and this is kind of very fuzzy delineation of the broadly conceived area of Deontic logic. Of course, it is a question what it means to play the language games successfully, but I don't have time to go into details. I have some ideas about this. It is perhaps worth saying that the terms the master, the slave, and the kibitzer shouldn't be taken so seriously. We can imagine that, I don't know, the state is in the position of the master, or the god is in the position of the master, or if we require something from the state, we are in the position of the master, and the state institutions are in the position of the slave. So it can be kind of generalized even to kind of ethical games and other legal games and similar. So here are 2 simple examples of language games. The first one consists of the first prescription: don't smoke, don't drink alcohol, and don't sing. And it's quite clear that if in the beginning the sphere of permissibility consists of all possible words, that after the first step it shrinks, after the second it shrinks even more, and after the third move it shrinks even more. This is easy. The second game is somewhat more complicated. Once again, if we can imagine that we have prescription: heat the kitchen, don't smoke, heat the living room and the bedroom, and then permission: if you are heating the living room, you needn't heat the kitchen. And now the problem is that what happens with the sphere of permissibility after the fourth step. And this is the problem that Lewis discusses in his paper, and he actually concludes that he doesn't see any reasonable or any satisfactory answer to this question. So he poses the problem, he discusses some possible solutions, and he concludes that all of the solutions that he can present kind of fail. Okay, so this is called Lewis's problem of permission. Then, once again, from the point of view of separating Deontic logic into different subdisciplines, we can clearly distinguish at least three areas of logic in a broad sense. The logic of the master's language, where the key question is which prescriptions are entailed by prescriptions issued by the master. So, to take a very simple, trivial example, the master who prescribes wear a hat and a jacket and refuses to admit that he prescribes wear a hat is logically inconsistent. Yeah. His prescription has some logical consequences, and we can kind of study the consequences within the logic of the master. I suggest, but I am mentioning it only kind of as aside, that it's surely much better not to use the prescriptive interpretation of the classical Deontic language, but to use some other language, preferably what is called dyadic language in Deontic logic or logic of imperatives, where we have formulas like this, but I will not go into any details as concerns this. Then we can clearly distinguish the logic of the Kibitzer or the Kibitzer's language, where the key question is which Deontic propositions, which kind of descriptions of the situations are entailed by the propositions by which the Kibitzer describes the normative situation. So once again, the Kibitzer who claims the slave ought to wear a hat and a jacket and refuses the claim the slave ought to wear a hat is logically inconsistent. We have there some logic. These are quite standard kind of areas of Deontic logic, though the second one is the classical area, classical account of Deontic logic in the narrow sense, like logic of Deontic propositions. And the problems here are discussed either in the logic of norms as von Licht understands it, or also to some extent in the logic of imperatives or logic of commands with different kind of specific presumptions. Then we have also, we can study also something which I propose to call the logic for the slave. And the key question there is how prescriptions issued by the master shape the sphere of permissibility described in the Kibitzer's language. This is actually the problem that is touched upon by Lewis. You have as an input sentences formulated in the language of the master, the prescriptions that we could see in the language game, and as an output sentences of the Kibitzer that are supposed to describe the resulting situation, and they may describe it correctly or incorrectly. And this logic, this area of Deontic logic is kind of close to non-existent. There are few articles in the literature that try to address problems of this kind. But things get somewhat more complicated because we can, all the language games and the related logics conceive either statically or dynamically. So one picture is that all the prescriptions or all the descriptions of the normative situations are kind of presented on the same level, which is quite typically or normally done or presupposed in the classical narrowly conceived Deontic logic, and as we could see, it is less natural if you look from the perspective of the language game. So roughly, the master who issues within a static language game these two prescriptions, wear a hat and a jacket, and don't wear a hat, is contradicting himself, is logically makes a logically incorrect move because what we prescribed is obviously kind of it cannot be fulfilled. while the master who issues the same prescription in an order, like first this one and the second this one, is not contradicting himself. He just changed his mind, and he has kind of shaped by the second step in the dynamic game the sphere of permissibility just in a different way. The sphere automatically adjusts itself accordingly. Yeah. So the resulting situation is that we can conceive 6 kind of basic sub-areas of Deontic logic. Logical studies focused on the language of the master viewed as static. Logical studies focused on the language of the kibitzer viewed as static. Logical studies focused on the language of the master viewed as dynamic. Once again, focused on the language of the kibitzer viewed as dynamic. And then the kind of less common studies, logical studies focused on the problems how the prescriptions of the master viewed as static kind of issued at once for the Deontic situation that is described in the Kibitzer's language, and the logical studies focused on the problem how the prescription issued by the master viewed as dynamic, that in the dynamic game when the new prescriptions can supersede the old ones, for the Deontic situation that is described in the Kibitzer's language. The Deontic logics that are fallaciously conceived make the mistake of kind of not distinguishing between the logic of prescriptions and logical descriptions, and trying to blend usually the DL1 and DL2 and kind of make one logic that would cover the problems from these areas which I think that are to be carefully separated. The studies that are the Deontic studies or the Deontic logics that take care of that focus also on the dynamic aspect are much less common in the literature, but you would find some literature, both of the DL3 and DL4 kind. Then there are these logical studies that of this DL5, and in fact I know of only about one system that seems to me to be addressing these issues, and it is the original input-output logic from the Makinson's article from the 1999. But what is quite surprising that when I was talking with David Makinson, he was kind of not aware of the fact that his theory could be understood in this way. And in fact, the later development of the input-output logic, the work that he produced with Leonard van der Torre, kind of shifted the attention, and it doesn't seem to be dealing with these problems anymore. So so there are once again the studies, the logical theories that could be classified as DL5 are close to non-existent. And once again, these problems that take into account the dynamics of the language games. So we have some attempts, like the Lewis's article, which, as I said, doesn't have any clear outcome. Then some people like Mervyn Belzer or me with my colleague Timothy Childers, we tried to present some solutions to the problem of permission. So there are some theories in this area, but they are really scarce. So this is the scene, and I could stop my presentation here. I don't know how I'm with time, but I would like to proceed a bit more. Can I?
Yes, please.
So one simple example on which I can illustrate why it is so important to distinguish between this DL1 and DL2 is the so-called Ross paradox, which is a problem discussed in Deontic logic since the 40s of the 20th century. And the question is whether inference from you ought to do P to you ought to do P or Q is valid. And I want to suggest that if you look at the problem from the viewpoint of language games, then it appears quite clear that it is OP and OP or Q are interpreted as expressions of the master's language, then the conclusion is not entailed by the premise, or reasonable Deontic logic of the first type, DL1, shouldn't have this as a correct inference. The example is the old traditional one, actually coming from Ross, mail this letter, hence mail this letter or burn it, seems like really implausible inference. Because the only reasonable interpretation of sentences like this one is that they are choice of free. I don't think that within that any speaker of English would take this, would understand the command like this not as choice of free. While if we understand the Ross paradox as an inference in the language of descriptions, as inference in the logical system that is focused on the Kibitz's language, then it makes good sense to admit that the conclusion is entailed by the premise. It is obligatory that you mail the letter, hence it is obligatory that you mail the letter or burn it. Sounds somewhat suspicious, but much less than the previous inference that includes prescriptions. So I want to suggest that these systems of DL2, in this my classification, that take the form as valid may be reasonable. But in fact, also systems will classify this inference within this inference in this kind of logic as invalid may be reasonable too. It's a kind of matter of choice. It is a matter of the semantics that we choose for expressions like that in this descriptive language. And if I have some 3 or 5 minutes, so I will continue to a last kind of example that tries to illustrate what is the problem. So let's assume that we have the trivial language game in which the master asks the slave, walk the dog. And then let's assume that the slave did not understand what the master said and asks the kibitzer what he is supposed to do. And so let's consider the possible questions and they kind of, from the point of view of their correctness or adequacy. So if the kibitzer in this situation says you are obliged to clean the kitchen, what the kibitzer says is obviously false. Just wrong description of the situation. If he says you are obliged to walk the dog, then the answer is really true and kind of perfect. It describes the situation adequately. If the kibitzer says you are obliged to clean the kitchen or you are obliged to walk the dog, then I think that you would agree that what the kibitzer says is true, but the information that he gives to the slave is kind of imperfect. It's not exactly helpful because it doesn't give the slave enough information. And what about if the kibbutzer says, you are obliged to clean the kitchen or walk the dog? That's a problem. I think it's not entirely clear whether this answer is correct or not. Once again, we have the same problem as on the previous slide. If we adopt D as correct, true description of the situation, so this is kind of choice that leads to accepting this Kibitzer's static logic, which licenses the Ross paradox inference as correct. And this is the choice that we have to make. And this is a choice that you have to make as, I wanted to say native speakers of English, but there are only...
There's one.
Yeah. Okay, but as speakers of natural languages, you should have some idea of whether this is a correct answer or not. So, and if you do that, then it gives you some guides as concerns choosing the logic, kind of streamlining or standardizing the inference rules for situations like this. Now, once again, what about if the master says to the slave, clean the kitchen or walk the dog? And the kibbutzer says to the slave, you are obliged to clean the kitchen. I guess that you would agree that what the kibbutzer says is false. It's wrong description of the normative situations. Similarly, if he says, you are obliged to walk the dog. Once again, it's false. What if he says, you are obliged to clean the kitchen, or you are obliged to walk the dog? It sounds kind of closer, but still I would say that this is a wrong description of the situation. So this claim is false because the slave doesn't have this kind of specific commitment neither to clean the kitchen nor to walk the dog. What about if he says, you are obliged to clean the kitchen or walk the dog? And here we once again kind of face the choice of interpreting the sentence in some specific, some precise way. I think we would agree that the answer is true, but is it also perfect? Does it give the adequate descriptions of the normative situation? No. It's really not easy to see. If we understand the B answer as synonymous with the answer, you are obliged to clean the kitchen or walk the dog, the choice is yours, then this answer will be true and perfect. If we don't, then it will be probably true and imperfect because the information about the choice is not contained. I want to suggest that we, in fact, can, if we adopt the logic, the relative logic of the Kibitzer's language that licenses the Ross paradox inference as correct, then we have, or the Kibitzer has a way how to express in this kind of streamline, this regimented language, what is contained in the true description of the situation in this way. You are obliged to clean the kitchen or walk the dog, and you are permitted to clean the kitchen, and you are permitted to walk the dog, and you are permitted not to clean the kitchen, and you are permitted not to walk the dog. So even in this kind of language, in which the formulas like this and sentences like this are interpreted like in the weak way, that in such a way that this is understood as true but imperfect, the Kibitzer in principle has a way to formulate, to describe the situation adequately, though in this not very kind of elegant manner. But this, I want to suggest, and here is the question mark, because I'm not completely sure about that, but I want to suggest that this is kind of probably the adequate description of the situation arising from this, with this simple language. And that's all.